It's victim blaming, or this person's 100% responsible for everything that happens to them, and then pull them up by their bootstrap. Okay, those are absurd on their face, But to say that someone that you're making an inappropriate value judgment about somebody by identifying that if they're not bouncing back from a trauma, then by definition, their resilience skills are insufficient to do so. That's not a judgment. It's simply a statement of fact. If I say now that's because they're a weak person, well, then I just turned it into an inappropriate value judgment. There we go. How's it going?
Uh, Pretty good, man. Pretty busy and feeling, well, I feel like I've been feeling sort of, I don't know what I would call it, creative frustration. Sort of, I have all this stuff that uh, I feel like I need and can create. And, truthfully, I probably haven't been managing my time as well, but also it's the nature of life and a full life and family and just everything. So I won't beat myself up too much about it, but yeah, just really need to figure out setting blocks of time routinely, because it's just like, people talk about, I just wasn't really feeling the creativity. Well, half the battle is you have to put yourself in position. This is why we have rituals and things like that to sort of prime us to get us into those things.
Yeah, it's wow. Talk about wavelength. So just after a discussion with Paul, where he told me when he was CMO, he used to break his schedule down into 15-minute blocks and plan out tomorrow at the end of today, right? And I said,
Yeah.
well, interesting. I took that and combined it with unconsciously, but I was actually coaching a client last night, and it came up. I combined it with that old story about the professor who's got the pile of rocks, smaller rocks, pebbles, and sand, and a jar of water, and a jar at the front. And he talks about his students about how it could possibly all fit in. I put the big rocks in first. So when I pick the important, longer things that I'm going to do for the next day, I put those on the schedule first. Then I look at the 15-minute chunks, 30-minute chunks, 20-minute chunks that are left over. I'm like, well, I have no shortage of small wins that I can pop into those. And then it actually turns ADD into a feature instead of a bug, because then, I can hyper focus on something for 90 minutes, and then I can flit from task to task. But since it's planned, I'm just feeding right into it. And I do this, do that, do this. And I've started one of the things that I've added on as a daily habit, is audiobooks while I'm walking the dog. So that's a triple win, right? Dog's happy. I'm probably going to be less fat over time. And it's a great opportunity to sneak in the listening and professional development. And ironically, the book I started this morning is Atomic Habits, which turns out I think is going to be another one of my right in the wheelhouse perfect books to listen to, because I spent half the time nodding and half the time, shouting at clouds while I'm listening to it, walking around the neighborhood. Because, right, it's what,
Yeah.
when you listen to a book, if you agree with it 100%, what are you listening to it for? You already know what's there. You haven't, by the end of the book, yes, it may have been enjoyable. Perhaps that's what you're after, but did you learn anything? Not if nothing
Yeah.
new was presented to you, or not anything that you disagreed with that you had to either adjust what you thought, adopt a new thing, or explain and reinforce, why you disagreed, so that you're more articulate and sure of it later. Or if I listen to a book and I agree with literally nothing, all it's going to do is aggravate me, right? Puts you in that mindset of just being combative with with the information that's coming in. So I find that a book like James Clear's book is right right in the wheelhouse. I'm like, okay, this is nudging my understanding of habits, behavior, goal setting, growth mindset. Um, but he's doing a good job marketing and oversimplifying stuff for a non-academic public that's trying to read the book and get something out of it. And I
Yeah.
understand that. But of course, as a cranky, academic in recovery, it just sets me off. So, But yeah,
Yeah. Well, I hope you never lose that edge, you know?
no, I mean, it just is who I am. You try to embrace the quirks that are functional and temper them down so that they don't become, you know, off-putting to people that are important to you or detrimental to your own growth.
Yeah, well, with the concept of psychological integration, it isn't about getting rid of particular aspects of ourselves. It's about differentiating it so that we can integrate it, which means they're understanding when it's appropriate to be this way or that way and when it's inappropriate to be. And so sometimes being the hypercritical, skeptical version of you is the right thing to do. And then sometimes that's the last thing that's really called for because there's something else that supersedes that in rank of importance. And so
Yeah,
it's like, oh, I'm never going to be critical and skeptical again because that's, caused me a few problems before. It's like that's not the answer either.
right. I have to thank my positive psychology instructors for not going off the deep end into toxic positivity. As some popular authors, I'm not going to call anybody out, but there's a lot of people who have their coaching programs or their books, et cetera, that are based on positive psych. But it's kind of a it's kind of a misinterpretation of the whole idea. And it's subtle in its language. It's like that thing we talked about another time, one of these Thursdays about, is that negative occurrence that happened to you? How do you make it a gift? You don't. You make a moral judgment that that thing that happened was awful. And then you make a further moral judgment about your own responsibility to make the best of whatever happens to you and do something positive after the fact. I suppose some people helps them to think, well, then it was a gift. It was a positive occurrence that happened. I suppose if it gets you to the same point in the short term, I don't have much quibble with it. In the long term, I think it's poisonous. I think if you fail to practice being a moral being by making moral judgment, you lose that skill. That's a muscle like anything else. And the example that I threw out was people misinterpret what Christopher Reeve said at the Academy Awards. I wouldn't miss it for the world. He was not saying that he's so happy that he got thrown off that horse and broke his neck. That's not the thing he would have missed for the world. He dedicated his life to making sure nobody else had to experience what he's experiencing or experienced. Rest in peace.
Mhm.
But he went out on stage and said, I wouldn't miss this for the world, meaning he wasn't going to let what happened to him stop him from still being
Yeah.
part of the Motion Picture Academy, et cetera. I'm like, it's a nuance, but I mean, that's one of the themes we've been hashing about for months is everything, if you use your brain, there's some nuance to lots of things.
Yeah,
Not so
you may
much
have been through something
meaningless, but
very negative and terrible and even traumatic. And, through deep work, um, you heal from it, you overcome it, and then there are these wonderful, meaningful lessons that you have been able to derive from it. And so there's gratitude for the experience of that, but you're not going to wish the particular tragedy upon anyone else just so they can have some meaning in their life. Now, that being said, there's an abundance of suffering and tragedy that we will invariably encounter, and those will be some opportunities to respond to it in a way um, that you will have the choice to transform the experience into meaning, but it's not the thing. And I think it actually um, diminishes the whole process if we label the negative thing, the traumatic thing, the tragedy or whatever it is as the gift in and of itself.
yeah,
I think
the
it's about
nuance,
transforming the experience of that thing.
right, right. Or I won't even go as far as the experience of the thing. It is the I'll use my wife as an example. Her breast cancer is neither a gift and the experience of it is not anything to be grateful for. The Her strength, her resilience, and her resolve are the things to be grateful for. That she's come out stronger on the other side of something that is, as you said, you wouldn't wish this on your enemy, right? And that was something like she heard one of these, one of the audiobooks or videos or whatever I was reading. I was going through the positive psychology training, and she just stopped and she's like, wait, so what? My breast cancer is a good thing now? And that, hit the pause on the learning material, and the two of us hashed that out for a little while of like, okay, why is what people are saying about responding to tragedy and trauma clearly of value, right? What they're saying to do, make the best of it, work positive, look for an opportunity, make yourself stronger, you know, all of that is true, all that is helpful, all that is a net good and an absolute good, frankly. What are we missing in that nuance, or what are they missing in the nuance that just rubbed the wife and I completely the wrong way given the experience we were having? And it's like it's that subtle, we ranted about it a little bit last week, this subtle creep of postmodernism and nihilism into everything, of it's trendy and seemingly intellectual and enlightened. That's the word I think I'm groping for, to think of these things as, well, there is neither good nor bad. Yeah, there actually is. And your ability to tell the difference is a really important skill, that if you just, whitewash everything as, well, it's all a big zero in the end sum. Yeah, but there's a lot of waggle in that curve.
Yeah, yeah. In some way, it could be erroneous to adopt the mindset that the negative thing, the tragedy, the trauma, is a gift in and of itself, because it risk wrapping your identity up in the thing,
Yeah,
over identifying with it. And then it's like, if that's part of our identity, and then when life calls us to heal from that, to transform ourselves in response to the thing, which means maybe the thing has less grip on you in a negative nihilistic way, which means sort of, I don't like to say letting go, but moving beyond that. Um, a lot of people perceive that on an unconscious level as losing their sense of identity, because they've wrapped their identity up in this thing so much. And then
yeah,
when that happens, it's like, well, I can't lose my sense of identity. And so then people become possessive of this idea of this thing being a gift in and of itself, rather than the totality of the experience, how you're going to respond to the tragedy, the terrible thing in and of itself, um, and, which takes more work than simply just, well, that's a gift, and I'm just going to be right here, and I'm okay the way I am. And of course, that's reinforced in our society way too much, in my opinion. And it's like, are we okay the way we are? Not with everything. I hope this isn't the best that I get, and I hope this isn't the best that you get. Otherwise, it's like, I don't believe in myself, or I don't believe in you, or at least that you could be any better. And maybe that leads to an even bigger problem if we're not even believing in each other or ourselves, in the sense that we could be more of what we have the potential to be.
yeah. That it goes back. I think that, I don't know if we've discussed it more than just in passing, that resilience is a bad concept post. I mean, that's an oversimplification of what the poster was saying on LinkedIn. Um, but you describe, your initial reaction to that was that was a very lazy take, to fall into the trap of, uh, if we over rely on resilience as a good concept, then we are necessarily victim blaming because it's this person's fault, they just can't get over it. And no, yeah, there are two errors in that false dichotomy, right? It is this person's responsibility, thus it is this person's fault. No, though, you sent out that video of Michael Caine reading "If" by Kipling, right? And as I listened to that, I'm like, well, I don't know if this is timely on purpose or what, but the whole, can you hold two thoughts in your head at the same time, right? Is nuance a muscle that you're working out and developing as as a human skill? Because these things are more complicated than that. And like you said, it's lazy, or it's oversimplifying. It's almost like, um, when you teach a child not to go too close to a fire or a hot plate, and you oversimplify, you have them thinking at some point fire bad. Fire's not bad. Getting burned is bad,
Yeah.
right? Fire's great. When I keep it in this glass box in my fireplace with a gas pilot light and ignition and electronic temperature control, and fire's fantastic. I'm a huge fan of fire. I bet the cavemen were too when they stopped freezing to death. Um, it's a little bit more nuanced than fire bad. And I think that's one of the things that, you talked about reinforcing our society, the goal of a suffering free existence, a risk free existence, a mistake free existence, a negative free. Okay, well, there's also no reward that goes with that without some risk. Risk is another one of those things that's nuanced, where there's foolhardy risk that is doomed to failure and is only self destructive. And then there is achieving nothing, because if all risk is bad, right, you make no progress because you have to risk failure to achieve success. And most of the time, when you do achieve success and you look back, it was not a straight line. There were plenty of missteps and mishaps. And I mean, that's on a biologic, physiologic level, right? I just One of the experiments that Clear quotes in Atomic Habits is one of the operant conditioning, cat in a puzzle box, right? Well, cat starts 90 seconds to escape from the box, and then it's 30, then it's back up to 60, but it wasn't 90, 80, 70, 60, 50. It bounced around. And even at the end, the speeds with which the cat escaped from this box after learning that the lever did it was 5, 6, 5, 7. The lowest one, the last one, was slower than the previous three. What does that mean? It doesn't mean
Yeah.
anything. It's right.
Yeah.
It's all in the
So,
average.
so even if you sort of nail it on the first try, how do you really know that you nailed it?
Right. And I tell my boys
If
that
you have no sort of data points, right? And so it's just like, so
yep,
yeah, the second attempt, why did I do worse when, you think the second one would be even better, and it's not always the case.
right. And I'm teaching somebody a skill, and chess, baseball, whatever it is. They do it. I'm like, okay, do it again. What do you mean? Do it again. I want to know if you're lucky or you're good. Do you know
Yeah.
what you did? Was it intentional? And even if it was intentional, it's not automatic. You haven't built it. One of the things I do like about Clear's book so far is the idea of it's got to become automatic if you're going to do it repeatedly, unconsciously, and without the effort.
Yeah. I was just thinking it has to be repeatable.
Yeah. Well, if you don't know what you're doing, how do you know that you can do it again? Right. And I joke with them. I'm like, oh, are you lucky or are you good? What do you mean? Did you mean to do that, or did it just work
Yeah.
out well?
Yeah. Well, it makes me think of beginner's luck. There's a reason why we have that notion and that we point it out, right? Well, maybe it's beginner's luck because experience tells you, yeah, with the second hand, I probably won't play the cards as well as I did my first go at it. So
And the person who will say beginner's luck is often the expert. And it is not a denigration of the beginner's success. It's a trying to frame it for the beginner that, like, look, I know something you don't know, which is, even though I'm an expert at this, I'm gonna not achieve it 100% of the time.
yeah,
So let me just give you that perspective that what you did might not have been intentional, and it's going to take more work even to get it as
yeah.
successful as
It,
I do, which is still less than 100%.
it's an understanding that when we're doing something we've never done, technically speaking, it's a shot in the dark, and we know that even if that shot in the dark landed pretty close the first shot, that it could have easily been completely off the mark. So it's that understanding that, hey, this was a shot in the dark. As much as I might like to think that I was able to predict how to, hit the mark with something I've never even seen before. That's, probably the brain, it's constant pursuit of cognitive ease, but
Right.
kind of makes me go back to the, post on resilience a little bit there, because fundamentally, I think that this post, in my view, raised this axiomatic presupposition that resilience is counterproductive. And
Yeah.
they didn't say that, but you can infer that from that. And it's just like, if people would take a moment and question their attitude about something. Why do I have this attitude around this concept or this notion? Then maybe we can get closer to those axiomatic presuppositions and realize like, okay, that's it's a very incomplete one at best. I mean, and maybe it's just outright wrong, but and then maybe you realize, okay, there's something to that sometimes that warrants some nuance, and then I can provide the nuance. But that particular post, which I think is a microcosm of how a lot of people sort of present things these days, was like there's no nuance and there's no questioning the attitude there.
I think it's worse than that even. I think the post actually, as I read it a little more carefully, it was that yes, resilience and bouncing back and working through a trauma, a negative occurrence. They actually admitted that it was important and good, but because the concept is presented and pursued and researched and taught poorly, which I agree with them in many cases it is, they took that as we shouldn't bother. Not here is a net human good, a necessary skill to flourish, right? Without resilience, that's you're going to have a rough life. That's just about the way it is. If it's being taught poorly, if it's being characterized poorly, if it's being pursued poorly, that doesn't mean that the net good is not a good. It means we need to adjust the method by which you promote, teach, and hone these skills and how you characterize it so that it is not the false dichotomy of bootstraps, victim blaming, right? Both of
Yeah,
those are clearly ridiculous. I mean, it just on their face. It's one of my calculus professor used to say, well, it's intuitively obvious to a casual observer. In calculus, I was not a very astute casual observer, but in this human interactive resilience is bad or good. It's victim blaming or this person's 100% responsible for everything that happens to them and then pull them up by their bootstrap. Okay, those are absurd on their face, But to say that someone that you're making an inappropriate value judgment about somebody by identifying that if they're not bouncing back from a trauma, then by definition, their resilience skills are insufficient to do so. That's not a judgment. It's simply a statement of fact. If I say now that's because they're a weak person, well, then I just turned it into an inappropriate value judgment. And if I say
yeah,
suck it up and get better at resilience, just abracapocus do it, that's ridiculous. If it's
yeah,
I identify that person that is struggling with getting back past a trauma because their resilience is insufficient, and that means that they need a better network of help. They need individual counseling. They need work. They need processing. And then I go one step further than that to say, you know what? It'd be great if I could identify who had inappropriate, insufficient resilience skills before they were traumatized and figure out a way to build those up ahead of time, right? To negate that, well, okay, we'll just throw out the entire discipline and movement of positive psychology as hokum. It's as you said, it's lazy, it's reductive, and I've again as to make it worse than that, I think it was harmful. I think
yeah,
the point of view is actually doing humans harm because the opposite would be identify those people by just being honest. You look, your resilience skills are just not where they need to be, and it's not if this trauma you insufficiently planned for, well, okay, that's life. Nobody plans for a horrific trauma, right? And even the most practiced, skilled, and rehearsed resilience routines may not be sufficient for some of the horrible things that humans endure. Okay, that person needs help, right? And if I take that as the result from stating a fact of there's a gap between resilience need and resilience skill, then I've done a net good, right? I've identified a person who needs help, and then we focus our help on them. And for the folks who
yeah.
resilience is sufficient, well, good. How did you do that, and how can you teach other people, or how can we teach other people to do that?
Yeah, it's almost like it's placating to people's insecurities around their insufficient resilient skills, right? Because like if I point that out and you're insecure, And the only way that you're going to be able to make sense of it, or at least the initial way that you're going to attempt to make sense of it, is probably through a moral lens. And in that sense, it's like, oh, you're moralizing me, or you're moralizing the person who is, has suffered trauma here because you're pointing out the fact that they're not resilient enough. And who do you think you are? And it's like, no, that's not it at all. I'm actually trying to empower the person
Right.
to, heal and overcome the whatever the trauma is. And, Carl Rogers says the facts are friendly. So
And
let's point out the facts here. They don't have to be a tax on our um, esteem, if you will. But it's like certainly comes down to the personal responsibility again, and the terrible narratives that directly or indirectly sort of perpetuate the notion that, well, if the system was better, you would be better.
right, right. And I try to do useful oversimplification when I can. It would be like, teaching one of my boys to pitch, right? I taught a kid a new pitch, and he'd only been working on it for a week or so, and he threw it in a game, and he actually threw it two pitches in a row, and the first one he executed it perfectly, but he set it up wrong, and the second one he set it up perfectly and executed it wrong. And the first time he threw it, it did not strike out a player that he had two strikes on. And the second time that he threw right after that and executed it, set it up right and executed it poorly, the kid hit one that hasn't landed yet. Okay, now
Yeah.
life is unfair. The system is unfair. It was the after action review with that young man was like, all right, what happened? He hit a NASA experiment, coach. He sure did. Why? Because this. Okay, so you learned from throwing it, setting it up wrong to set it up correctly, but you haven't practiced it enough where it's consistent that you can throw it. You threw it 50% execution at that at bat. It's Is that good enough to prevent a guy who's already got, a D1 intent letter playing little league in the summer? Yeah, yeah. If anybody was going to hit a moonshot, it was this guy. Even if you threw the pitch perfectly, you had a decent chance of throwing it. Of
Yeah.
him hitting over the fence. And he's like, "Yeah, you're right. I need to work on that pitch more than 2 weeks before I throw it to that guy." And I said, "Yeah. And what's the positive though? Is the first time you threw that pitch, but it was a little bit too far on the inside, but it broke just how you wanted. Did you see his eyes?" He's like, "Yeah." I'm like, "You threw something he'd never seen before." And he didn't know what to make of that. Now, when you hung it and threw it a little bit closer to the middle of the plate, he definitely knew what to do with that. But there's no moralizing and victim blaming, right? Mason, you gave up a home run. Why? Because I hadn't practiced the pitch enough, coach. Okay. Did you get any positive feedback or inkling that that is worth practicing? Oh, yeah. If I'd thrown it correctly and set it up correct, if I'd done those two things together on either one of those pitches, even throwing it back to back, I'd have struck out a guy with a D1 commitment letter to UW. Okay. Focus on that, right? As the reason that we're going to throw that pitch until it's annoying over the next month so that you have it for when we go to the playoffs. Without identifying the simple fact that what happened, I misexecuted or misset up this pitch. Okay. And what happened? It ended up over the fence. Okay. Is there a moral judgment yet? Have I told Mason, you're a bad young man and I hate you? No, it never came out of my mouth. I'm like, hey, dude, what happened? It's not, it's just a statement of fact. It's an observation. You you hung a cutter and it'll come out of orbit sometime and burn up on reentry, I think. Right? You had a trauma and you're struggling and not flourishing. Okay. What, well, how are you bouncing back? I'm not. I am struggling, and it is a daily grind and I'm making no progress. Okay. Well, why is that? Why is that? Why? And get to the thing that you can change. I I want to help this person. There's no moral judgment at all. But to
Yeah.
to avoid pointing out, as you said, facts are friendly. Avoid pointing out that fact because you're concerned someone might make a moral judgment. Sure, someone might do something bad, but you're concerned that this person might think that you're moralizing them. Well, then that's a communication problem on your part.
Right, right. Because I was going to say the inverse of that, or the flip side of that is if the person isn't really explaining themselves well enough on the other end, which okay, that's happens, is that we don't ask enough questions. That's one of the biggest things I work with clients is people would come in and it's generally their life problems have to do with, not just themselves, but someone else in their life. And so they come in and rightfully so, they're venting, they're trying to process, they're giving me information, and it's all, well, the facts are friendly. So they're friendly for me too, because it helps me do my job. Um, but essentially they're wrapped around the axle around something that someone did or said. And they recount the conversation essentially to me. And 9 times out of 10, if I could quantify it, nowhere in their recounting of the story did they tell me about them inquiring into what the person meant or
Mm.
what they're getting at. And so invariably I'll say, so did you ask them? Did you ask them what they meant? Did you ask them what they're trying to do? And I'll tell them one of the most powerful questions we can ask is, well, what do you mean by that? What does that mean? Because we take something, and understandably so, right? It's human nature.
Yep.
But what happens if and they're always like, well, no, because did you ask them? Okay, go ask them and see what happens. And virtually every time they'll come back and say, well, we had a talk, and actually what they were uh, talking about was this, and I got a better understanding, and we're more on the same page now, and things are going pretty well.
Do you ever get the, well, no, that would be awkward and uncomfortable to ask that
Oh
question?
yeah.
Yeah.
Well, so then just keep doing what you're doing then, and let me know how that works out for you. I think you know how it's going to
I
work
mean,
out.
that's the question. Like, okay, how awkward is it to be in your therapist or your coach's office trying to figure this out? This, if you want to keep doing
Yeah.
this and
Yeah.
not,
Is this the thing you want your life to be about? Is
yeah.
being wrapped around the axle with this thing?
Yep. And it's again for coaching, which is more awkward, having the conversation with my pitcher about, hey, why'd this happen, or leaving that poor kid on the mound with no feedback, no direction, no coaching. And what's going to happen? He's going to throw it again. And again, it's going to become a moonshot. Yeah.
Yeah.
It seemed to me more awkward to fail or more
Yeah.
awkward to have that broken relationship than, yes, it is going to be awkward
Yeah.
to have an uncomfortable
Well, it
conversation.
reminds me of the Catholic notion on marriage that the job of the husband and wife is to get each other into heaven. That's a fascinating concept because what it says is that, essentially I have permission to tell you when I think I see you doing something that's not going to get you into heaven. And you have permission to tell me when you think you see something, even if it's not true. If you think it is, you have to say something. The problem is when you tell me, I'm going to get defensive. And I might even try to flip it around on you. Well, you need to do the thing. So now you have to figure out, well, how can I deliver this in a way that they're receptive to? And you might be thinking about that for a long time because maybe you can't throw the perfect pitch to stick with the baseball analogy. And I'm sure you've seen this where you have some kid and they're throwing a ball back and forth and they miss it and the kid says, you didn't hit me in the glove. What do you mean? I got it close. And I'm no major leaguer here. I'm 10. Even if you have to like step to catch it and reach out, you can still do that. I'm
Mhm.
trying to get it close to you, but you also have the responsibility to sort of get close here. So it's like at some point there's, I don't know if it's a matrix or whatever it is, but it's just like, you know, duty versus humility. It's like, well, I need to have some humility to try to figure out how to not be a jerk when I say the thing. But maybe the thing is so important and urgent that it just needs to be said because maybe there's a long line of things that are going to need to be said. If I delay this one, the things are just going to get backed up. And so if I see something, I have to say something because like, let's say we get killed in the car crash and we get to the pearly gates and Peter's there and he's like, all right, Ed, come on in. You did everything you were supposed to do to get into heaven. I'll just run in with this analogy a little bit. And I come in and Nikki's kind of right behind me and Peter's like, hold up. You didn't do everything that you were supposed to do. What? Yeah, Ed was supposed to tell you. Well, why didn't you tell me? Well, you would always sort of get defensive and mad when I brought up something to you. Well, why didn't you tell me anyway?
Right.
Oh, I can't get into heaven, right? And you can see the imagery, and maybe it's a bit extreme, but I think it's applicable because maybe it's that important, even if it's about baseball, right? Because there are implications to that. You're, especially with kids, you're building a schema around things.
Well, and yeah, that schema, I'll even kind of let them behind the curtain as to what coaches, because I tell them, I'm like, look, the chances any of you are going to play in the major leagues is just about zero. The chances that many of you will get married and have sons and daughters of your own that you're going to want to coach and teach baseball to is actually pretty high. So you might as
Yeah,
well learn why I say some of the crazy things I say or why I do some of the things that I do so that you can start to internalize what effective coaching is while you're still a player. And I do this as a physician, I do this as a coach. Because, well, that was an awkward conversation. Agreed. If a good comes from the awkward conversation, was it worth having? And it almost always is. Do you get better at awkward conversations? You said, how you communicate the thing can make it more or less awkward, and it can still be impactful. Do you get better at something by not practicing it or avoiding it? I've failed to see anything in my immediate experience that fits that criteria where I get better at it by not doing it.
yeah,
And the alternative is, okay, what's more awkward? And again, in the extreme of, okay, I guess it's more awkward to not get into heaven, right? Or, what's it happens in the intensive care unit where I work. If I don't have an awkward conversation about, end of life issues, what was this person's wishes? Would they want to be brain injured on a ventilator? Would they want an ultimately futile, CPR effort on their behalf to try to resuscitate them when they die? And if it just gets papered over with, well, do everything. Okay. Do you understand what do everything looks like and means? No. Okay. You're going to thank or accuse me of being a straight shooter, but sit down. This is what that would look
hmm
like. Let me describe it to you before, and I've had this happen. You're sitting in the room visiting when this occurrence happens. Or I don't tell you that the chances of success are very, very low. And you don't tell me, I don't ask, so you don't tell me that your loved one never would have wanted this level of suffering for such a low chance of cure and recovery. It's going to be really awkward for you to come visit so and so in the ICU every day for 3 months, and they're still going to die at the end. And then we
yeah,
find out that both of us did not respect their wishes. That sounds way more awkward
yeah.
than
Right, right.
awkward chat to settle a
Yeah,
lot of those issues or get people thinking about them. Right meow.
yeah,
So there's no getting. I think that the fallacy is, just like, I'm raising a child. I can make it a riskless childhood. They'll never get injured. They'll never have a failure. They'll never do. Sure, they'll never succeed either. As if you cannot avoid all risk. You cannot avoid all failure. You cannot avoid all awkward. Can we make that a bumper sticker?
yeah. Well, your example of sort of in critical care and end of life, to me, that's a really good example of why all the nuance that we dive into is worth it because it helps us arrive to something that truly is sort of black and white. I either do this or I don't, and here are the consequences.
Right.
So it's like if I don't say something, um, then that's absolutely fundamentally an indication that I don't believe in you, that I don't believe you can handle it and do something with it. It's kind of like what you and I and Paul were talking about a couple of weeks ago. It's like, do you think she's a good person? Yeah, she'll figure it out.
Yeah.
But if I tell you, even if it's awkward, that's also an indication that I believe in you, that I believe you can handle it, that I believe you will come to your senses, that you'll come around, that it's going to be beneficial, and maybe even it's a belief that you'll be grateful for the whole thing. As far as me telling you the truth as I see it, And so that's a rare moment of me of being black and white here, but it's like if I don't tell you, you know, ultimately, um, then it's an indication of a severe lack of belief in you and what you can handle and your resilience or your potential for resilience.
Merry Christmas and have a happy New Year, brother. And
Yeah, Merry Christmas and Happy New Year to you and your family, and I hope it's wonderful and meaningful.
likewise. And I will see you in 2025, my friend.
Yeah, sounds good. Take care.
Bye bye.